Hey friends, hey friends, hey friends. This is Coach Rose AJ, Carnivore Girl for Life, coming to y'all with another phenomenal interview, if you could believe it. We are here today with Lynn from Midlife Carnivore. Did I get it right,
You
Lynn?
sure did.
Okay, Lynn, Midlife Carnivore. So get this, Lynn started her carnivore journey on May 29th, 2023 at the age of 55. And after having decades of chronic illness with no diagnosis, she was finally diagnosed with mast cell activation and hereditary alpha tryptasemia.
Got it.
That was a breath taker for me,
You did
y'all,
it.
in
It's a mouthful.
2022. And Lynn is also a retired nurse. And Lynn is basically going to, just jam with us, chat it up, and share, what brought her to the carnivore way of life and about some successes, some challenges that she's had, and where she's currently at in her journey and where she wants to go, I guess, in 2024 and beyond. All right, Lynn, it's all you, boo. I'm going to mute myself. It's about you right now. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Well, thank you so much, Rose, for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's wonderful to meet you, a fellow Washingtonian. I live a little bit north of Seattle. You live a little bit south, but we're going to have to connect with each other in person. But yeah, I'd love to share my story and because I do have since I've been diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome and I've learned about it, I've learned that it's way more common than is originally thought to be. And but I'll kind of go back a little bit and share because it took me 35 years of actually before from when I started to have symptoms to when I finally got diagnosed. And the main reason is because it didn't even have a name until maybe 10 years or so or ago or so. But I was a very just normal, healthy child, teenager, normal weight, metabolically healthy, or so I assumed because I was very active. I was a normal teenager. But when I got into my 20s, I started having some symptoms, and I did get diagnosed in my 20s with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Started gaining weight at age 20, associated with the exact same time I started having irregular menstrual cycles. But the treatment for it never worked. And as I got older, got married, my husband and I went through 4 times, did fertility treatments. Nothing worked. But the man, those fertility treatments just messed up my body. I was also having pretty bad heat intolerance. Um, I would very, very quickly out in the heat start to develop almost heat stroke type symptoms. I get really nauseated, very overheated very quickly, and feel like I was going to pass out. And it didn't take very long for that to happen. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'm just dehydrated or maybe I need to wear a hat out in the sun. And so I tried these things and it didn't make any difference at all. But I was in my 20s. I brushed it off and didn't think anything of it and just pretty much avoided the heat. But then also in my 20s, I developed really severe anxiety and started having extremely severe panic attacks. And I was not before that I wasn't an anxious person. I wasn't a depressed person. I was happy and had finished my first bachelor's degree and was working. And I was just it just hit me out of the blue. I started having these panic attacks, and I didn't do anything. I didn't seek any help for them, and I just put up with them. And sometimes I'd have them in my sleep, and I just thought, that's really weird. Like, I'm so relaxed, and a panic attack would wake me up out of my sleep. But young, pushing through everything, ignoring everything, busy on working and trying to build a life with my husband. And, we decided to adopt our children. And so when I was in my early 30s, we adopted our two of our kids. And so we got our son, he was 4. We adopted them out of the foster care system. He was 4 when we got him. 2 years later, we got our daughter, and she was 5.5 at the time. Both of them had been in and out of homes and had been abused. We didn't know the extent of the abuse. but it was definitely quite a challenge. And nursing is my second career. So at this time, I'm working as a corporate accountant. So I've got this, and I was working for AT&T Wireless and down in Sacramento, and doing my job. And the anxiety and the panic attacks kicked in again, and they became even more severe than before. And so I ended up one day at work, I was convinced I was going to die. And it was not rational, obviously. But I just told my coworkers, I have to go. I'm not feeling well. I have to go. And I drove myself to a psychiatric hospital and told them I'm going to die. And if I leave here, I am going to die. And they believed me that I really believed that. And they admitted me. So I was actually in a psychiatric hospital for 5 days.
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. What made you choose the regular hospital emergency room doctor? What made you go to a psychiatric hospital?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
I had been seeing a therapist, and my therapist had told me, at the rate you're going, you are going to have a complete collapse. And so this therapist gave me the information ahead of time of the psychiatric hospitals in my area. So I had that information in my purse.
Okay, then that makes total sense because I was like, most people would go to their primary or the emergency room or something for urgent care, but I just wanted to make sure that I understood and followed how you ended up there.
Yeah,
Okay,
excellent
thank
question.
you.
You're actually the first person to ask me that question. You're very intuitive. So yeah, so I was armed ahead of time, and I really do. I'm grateful for that therapist for seeing this coming and giving me the tools I needed. And she basically gave me the permission to do it, which was important because that's a scary step to take. And she helped me realize there's no shame in doing that. And so I think that's why I just did it, and I just drove there. And so yeah, so I was there for 5 days, and I don't remember much about it because I had a complete collapse. I remember they gave me Ativan, and that was the first time I had Ativan, and within about 20 minutes I could feel all of my insides relax for the first time in as long as I can remember. And it was so profound that I broke down crying. I didn't know that that's what I was supposed to feel like. And then I just slept. They could not get me to groups. They couldn't hardly get me up to meals because I absolutely just couldn't even function. And so after the 5 days, I guess, so the psychiatrist there diagnosed me with clinical level anxiety, depression, agoraphobia, and one other thing that I don't even remember. Um, but then from there, I transitioned over to a partial hospitalization program just to get that really intensive therapy. Um, but it took me, and I couldn't do anything at home. Every cell of my body was just done. I could not bathe myself. I could not cook. I couldn't do anything except sleep. And I slept and slept and slept for probably a good month. And, but I did over a couple years recover enough to function again. Um, so over that period of time, yeah, I'm gaining more weight. My nutrition is horrible. I have zero energy. But I got through that situation as well as best I could. And so oh, yes, go ahead.
So curious, during this time, who was helping with your family, with your household chores, with employment? How did that affect all of that?
So I was put on medical leave for work, and I had people from our church that were helping out with things like house cleaning and helping prepare food. And I had a friend from church that was the main one who was coming over more often, and she was trying to help me, like she asked me, how do you feel about maybe trying to prepare dinner? And she said, how about like something simple like spaghetti? You fry up the meat, and nothing from scratch, just cook the noodles, fry up the meat, pour in some Prego sauce, and you're done. I could not mentally even wrap my mind around the steps to doing that. it's like my brain was just could not even do more than like one little step at a time. And it was just a matter of my brain hadn't healed enough. Um, so that was really, really traumatic. And my poor husband, like he literally, I'm one of these that suffers in silence. And he had no idea what I was going through mentally. And all of a sudden, he gets a phone call from a psychiatric hospital that I'm admitted. And he's like, "What?" And it was on his birthday. And but yeah, it was a tough time for all of us. But I did get through it, and I, we ended up moving around California, and I was actually during the course of the next couple of years, some doctor decided to misdiagnose me with type 2 bipolar disorder and put me on lithium, which messed my gut up. He diagnosed me. He was some resident psychiatrist and he was fairly new. And he saw me sitting in the waiting area and I was kind of bouncing my leg a little bit. And he said, "Okay, you're type 2 bipolar." It's like, really? I'm anxious. Maybe that's why I'm bouncing my leg. But I never went back to see him, but I did go on the lithium and it really messed me up. Um, but I got off of that. So anyway, so fast forward, I got through the rest of my 30s. I got through my 40s, um, continuously gaining and gaining and gaining weight and struggling with weird symptoms that I was just ignoring. And we ended up moving up to Washington State from California in 2013. And I was working in a hospital in a step down unit from the ICU, loving my job. And I had this episode where I got really dizzy. And it was when I was caring for a patient who was on contract precautions, and I had to put on the full PPE, and that is very stuffy. And it's not just like being out in the sun that would trigger my symptoms, but it was also I'd gotten to the point where just feeling stuffy would cause issues with me. And I started feeling dizzy. And of course, all the nurses came rushing to my attention and they took my vitals. My heart rate and blood pressure were through the roof. And so the charge nurse sent me down to the ER in our hospital. They ran all the standard tests. They ruled out a cardiac issue, ruled out stroke, did a CT scan of my head. Doctor sent me home with some medicine, some meclizine for my ear, and said, "Well, it might be an ear issue, you know." So, ear plus anxiety, because like an ear issue isn't going to make your heart rate and your blood pressure go up. So it must be ear plus anxiety, right? So, anyways, I took it. It didn't help. And I did end up following up with a neurologist who did a brain MRI, didn't find anything. And then just over the course of so many, and so I just kind of let it go again. But over the course of the years, I've seen 17 different specialists trying to figure out why I have these weird reactions. But then I was kind of pushing through and fairly stable for a couple more years. And then in 2016, I had another reaction. And this time it was at home. And I was just sitting there watching some TV in my family room, and my throat started to swell, and my heart rate started to go way up. I could feel this tachycardia, and I had never experienced the throat swelling before. So I called 911. I got popped some Benadryl. I told my daughter who was napping in her room, I just called 911, and she's like, "What?" I went and unlocked the door and I went and sat down and waited for the EMT to come. And so they arrived. My heart rate was through the roof. My blood pressure was 220 over 120. And yeah, they took me to the ER. And the doctor there in the ER ran a whole series of tests. And this time, because of the throat swelling, the doctor ordered more tests for allergies. And all of the allergy tests came back normal, but he did order a test called a serum tryptase. And the tryptase levels were elevated. So he referred me to see an allergist. And this doctor was an allergist and immunologist, and sent me home with some prednisone and had me taking Benadryl. So I went to see this allergist, and the allergist says, well, you may have a mast cell disease. So he ordered another serum tryptase, and he ordered a 24-hour urine collection. And he said, next time you have one of these episodes, get these labs done. Because in order to really test, you have to be in the middle of an episode, supposedly.
So what were the urine samples for?
So the urine samples were to test for these chemical mediators that are excreted, or well, mast cells are part of your immune system. They're like the first line of defense of your immune system, and they will degranulate when they are exposed to some foreign pathogen or foreign substance, and they release like 200 plus chemical mediators into your body that coordinates your immune defense. That's normal. We all have that. Mine are dysfunctional, but these are three of those chemicals that are pretty, like, maybe a little more common to be able to show up in the urine. And so that's why he ordered that. One of them is histamine. Um, but so I the next I couldn't get the test done because the next two times I had an issue, we were on vacation. And I was actually at ground zero in Manhattan. And uh, yeah, we were at ground zero. We were, be doing the tourist thing, and we had just come out of the subway, and the subway is so stuffy. And I started getting an attack. I started feeling dizzy, and I started feeling nauseated. And I told my husband, we got to go back to the hotel. But the only way back was to go back through the subway. And so I found out then, and of course I couldn't get the lab test done. Um, but I found out then that if I don't get into cool air condition or cool down soon enough, I will end up with doubled over abdominal cramping. And that's what happened. So we ended up getting back to the hotel. It was nice and cool in there, but it took me hours to recover from that. Um, I know now that I was experiencing low grades of anaphylaxis. I did not know. And even as a nurse, I didn't know that there's stages of anaphylaxis. There's actually four stages. And the ones we hear about most often is the stage four, where it's life-threatening emergency. But there are symptoms leading up to stage four that are considered lower grade stages of anaphylaxis. And I was experiencing very frequently stages one and two, and occasionally stage three. Some symptoms in stage three, like with the tachycardia and some of those other symptoms. But so yeah, so it happened twice on that trip. And then when we came home, I'm horrible about this. Like, I don't follow up, right? I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm so busy with my life, and I'm so busy with my job. And I just didn't follow up again with that doctor. And then it happened again. So the pandemics came in 2020. And at that point, I was no longer working in the hospital. I was working in outpatient nursing. I was working in a gastroenterology, hepatology. And a lot of the work I was doing was over the phone with patients. But then we'd have nurse, visits. Patients would come in to see us, nurses. And I was on a team of 7 nurses. But then the pandemic hit. At that point, I was already working from home 1 day a week. And I had the whole setup at my home office, and I could triage patients and help patients over the phone. And so they sent all of us home that could work it from home initially. But then that was like March of 2020. So then June, they started bringing people back in and bringing patients back in for nurse visits. And so they said, like, okay, one nurse at a time is going to come in and do the patient visit. So when it was my turn, um, I had a reaction from the heat from my breath from wearing a mask. And I was seeing patients, and of course, and at that point, they weren't having everybody wear it like the whole shift. It was just when you're face to face with patients. This was before things got really crazy. But so I was just wearing it when I was seeing a patient. But even just that short period of time, the heat from my breath caused my throat to swell. I was getting dizzy and nauseated. And so I went to my manager and I told her what happened. She said, go home. So I ended up working pretty much the whole pandemic from home. Um, But then they said, back in like late 21, early 22, they said, okay, we need all of our nurses back in the office. And I was the only one that still was not back, you know, and doing my days in the office. And so they told me, either you figure out how to wear a mask, and this at this point it was 10-hour day, all day, wear a mask, or we're going to have to see if we can find a technically remote job for you, which would have been a totally different job that I, didn't want. But I asked them, so is it okay if I go back to the doctor? And I told them that I had been seeing an allergist and there were some suspicions about something that might be an issue with me. Can I go see the doctor again? And they said, sure, go ahead. They were very gracious. I don't fault my employer at all because they had already made so many accommodations for me and they were so gracious. And I felt bad that I was the one nurse that couldn't be there. And I was a nurse preceptor and I was like the senior nurse in the department and I couldn't be there physically. And I was remotely training our float nurses and training new, as occasionally we'd have some turnover on the team. I was remotely trying to train the new nurses. That was hard, right? So I went back to see the doctor, and the doctor said, let's just for the heck of it, let's run another serum tryptase. And don't worry about doing it when you have a reaction. Let's just go get it done. And also the 24 urine collection. Let's just get it done. And so I did. And the serum tryptase was even higher than it was years before. And there was something showed up in the urine test as well. And so the doctor said, okay, well, obviously, I think you have a mast cell disease. And at that point, it was not clear which one I had. Because anytime serum tryptase is over 20, and mine was, there's a possibility of something called systemic mastocytosis, which means that your mast cells themselves the bone marrow is producing abnormal mast cells. And so the mast cells themselves are abnormal. Whereas with mast cell activation syndrome, your mast cells are normal, but they're not behaving properly. So I ended up needing in March of 2022, I had to go get a bone marrow biopsy to differentiate and to see which one I had. And I didn't know at the time, but there is a pre-medication protocol because anytime with mast cell disease that you have a procedure, it can activate your mast cell disease. I was fortunate. I did pop some Benadryl ahead of time, but they made me wear a mask the whole time. And I told them the mask is a triggering, my breath is a triggering. They didn't care. So it's like, yeah, they could care less. I was pretty upset. So it took me a couple weeks at least to recover from that experience because the heat from my breath was making me dizzy all during the whole process. Every time I could, when no one was in the room, I took the mask off. I'm serious. They didn't even test me for COVID ahead of time. It's like I would have gotten a COVID test to prove that I was negative and then don't make me wear a mask, but they didn't care. They just like, I don't care. I don't care if it puts you into anaphylaxis. We need to protect ourselves, right? From you. I'm sorry. That's just how I took it. That was a big pet peeve for me. I was really upset being in healthcare and seeing that was the approach they took with me. I was not impressed at all, but I got through it. And so the bone marrow biopsy showed that my bone marrow was not producing the abnormal cells. So the doctor said, you have mast cell activation syndrome. So, and it does get progressively worse as you get older. And so it makes sense that over the years, I was able to kind of deal with it earlier on. And especially like if I just avoided heat and that was my worst trigger, I could kind of cope and deal with it. But I found out later that it can cause issues all over the body because we have mast cells everywhere, mostly in your gut and your lungs, but there's mast cells, they go to work everywhere. And so mine, basically how I explain it is it's like they're the first responder of your immune system. So it's kind of like you got a little tiny fire that you can put out with a fire extinguisher, and a whole fleet of fire trucks are sent to the scene. Or there is no fire and a whole fleet of fire trucks are sent out to the scene. It's an over response of the immune system. Um, and sometimes it's to a specific trigger, and other times it seems like it's just random, but I don't know for sure if it is actually really random. I just don't know what triggered it at that particular time. But I, my whole life, my whole adult life, I felt horrible every single day. And what a lot of people can associate and understand is like if you have allergies and you feel terrible when you have allergies, and or if you feel like you're coming down with the flu and you just are drained of energy and you have aches and pains and you just feel your head is all foggy, you don't feel good. That's how I felt every single day of my life.
Can I ask you something here, Miss Lynn,
Sure.
before you go on? I am like uber curious. So, after your hospitalization and you got back to your normal way of life, and you were on vacation in New York and you didn't follow up with the doctor, and you're in the healthcare industry, and I'm sure you'd probably give your patients the same, you know, aftercare, you need to go ahead and follow up with your
Right.
doctor, yada, yada, yada. Why didn't you follow up? I know life is lifey, but it sounds like you've had so many occurrences that I'm not saying be uber paranoid. I wouldn't want you or me or the next person to be that way, but I think I would have been overly protective and cautious at anything that deviated from what was normal for me.
Yeah.
How did you continue to go on after all of your prior experiences and scares? I'm just curious, girl. I
Yeah.
gotta
Yeah.
know.
Well, and some people will say nurses are the worst patients, but I don't think it was completely that. I don't, because I think it was a combination of my personality. I just push through things. And that's just the way I am. I move forward and I just ignore stuff until I can't ignore them any longer. It's just like when I didn't get any help for my anxiety back in my 20s until I had an absolute collapse. That was my personality. But also it was probably a lot of fatigue with seeing doctors, because I had been to 17 different types of doctors over the years and with no answers. And I think I was just done. You know, it's like, I think that's
Well,
probably maybe even more of a factor, was just the fatigue with the medical investigation that never led anywhere.
so I can say that I can relate to a lot of that, just pushing through, keeping on that superwoman cape or whatever you identify as. But I never really had problems where I was in the medical system having to go to the doctor over and over and over. My ultimate breakdown came in 2018 when I was going through perimenopause, then menopause. And I was just questioning everything as far as, is this the way that I'm going to live the rest of my life? What is the purpose of this? Yada, yada, yada.
Right.
But it was a crisis for me, and I believe in self-help as much as possible, but you had to seek medical care. I think that was the difference that I was trying to distinguish. Like, I think at
Yeah.
that point, I would have been, like, reaching out whether I wanted to hear from them or not, just because.
And I don't recommend
Yeah.
anyone do as I did.
Thank you, sister. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not up to that point in my life and up to the point of me be turning to the carnivore diet. I do not recommend that anyone do as I do. It was definitely a flaw in my personality, and and the fatigue. It is hard too when you just every day don't feel well and feel like you're coming down with a flu or something. There's zero energy. And I was eating horribly too, because everything I was eating, I was trying to find an energy source. And so all the garbage food would give me a little quick perk up, but then of course you crash, you don't feel good. So I was kind of wading through every day, raising my kids, trying to be a mom, trying to be a wife, working as a nurse, and sheer exhaustion was basically it for me. And I also had really severe sleep apnea, and I'd been sleeping with a CPAP machine since like 2008, and it didn't really help much. I mean, it kept me from it helped with the fatigue, didn't help with any weight issues for sure. But yeah, so it really took me like being threatened of not having my job to get me to follow up with the doctor. Um, and so I did get the diagnosis. I dove into learning more about mast cell activation syndrome, and it's listed. And then I did get a genetic test for hereditary alpha tryptasemia, and that came back positive. And what that means is that when so tryptase is one of the chemicals that the mast cells release when they degranulate, and my mast cells produce extra copies of tryptase. And so the extra tryptase does lead to some symptoms, but there's a ton of crossover as far as those two conditions. And the treatment is basically the same, which is to try to identify the triggers and avoid them. Antihistamines, mast cell stabilizers, there's definitely some medical approaches to it, but the allergist that I was seeing was not helpful at all. He threw three new medications at me and said, come back in 3 months if you don't feel better. And so at that point, I was having, okay, so I'd had the menstrual irregularities, I'd had the mental health issues, I'd had throat swelling, tachycardia, hypertension, dizziness, nausea. My gut was always uncomfortable, very bloated, and also had a lot of pain in my gut. I had bone pain, muscle pain, joint pain, horrible rosacea. Like I looked like a leper. I had hair follicle pain that woke me up at night. I had,
Wait a minute, girlfriend, hair follicle pain? Because
yeah,
I wear wigs, okay? But hair follicle
yeah.
pain, I don't understand that. Tell us about that. Can you elaborate? Just hair follicle. Is it your scalp or is your
I
hair
did a little
shedding?
investigation of that because it was all along the back of my hair, and it was I just did a little investigation because I was like, oh my gosh, why am I in so much pain? And I looked it up, and it was like someone said it read his hair follicles. Your hair follicles are in pain because the hair, it wasn't the hair, and it's so it's a bizarre occurrence, but mast cells can cause all sorts of symptoms. I was having urinary incontinence, and a lot of times it was like I just didn't quite make it to the bathroom in time, but there were some few, 2, 3 times that my bladder just released its contents. And one of those times I was in a restaurant, and it was absolutely mortifying. And so yeah, so I didn't get out much. Plus I felt absolutely horrible. And I always forget. I had so many symptoms. I forget some all the time, but I had sinus issues, just it's head to toe, just something going on at any moment all the time. Heart palpitations, even when I didn't have the more acute attacks, often I had heart palpitations. Um, so I was kind of a mess, but I did dig in and learn as much as I could about it. Both of those conditions are listed on the National Institute of Health website as rare. There are 4 places in the US where there's experts in mast activation syndrome, and they're all kind of towards the East Coast. So I wasn't able to see any of them, but I did not want to see this allergist who's just throwing medication at me. And I learned just through listening to these experts who have lectures online how important it is to identify the triggers. So I decided to go see a naturopathic doctor. And so turned my care over to the naturopathic doctor. And one of the things he tested for was mycotoxins. And I did test positive for mycotoxins. And we got a professional inspection of our home, and beautiful. The inspector said, your house is one of the cleanest I've seen when it comes to mold. So I may be one of these people that doesn't clear mold very well on my own. I'm not sure because I'm the only one in my family that has any issues. So I did take some glutathione. The doctor said, let's see if we can get you to sweat it out. But I'm like, well, but heat's a huge trigger. I can't take a hot shower. I have to take a lukewarm shower. I can't do an infrared sauna, which is a good way of sweating out mycotoxins, but I can't actually take a hot bath because the upper part of my body is not encompassed by the heat. So I just started every night was taking these hot baths with Epsom salts. And I could barely even get a couple drops of sweat on one wrist. This wrist, I'd get a few drops of sweat and that was it. So I did a retest and I still have some mycotoxins. They're a little better, but one of them has shown up that wasn't there before, which can cause some neurological issues, but it's not that high at this point. So I'm still working on that. So mycotoxins can be a trigger too for mast cell disease. But so I basically, from all that work I did in getting the diagnosis, I told my manager, look, heat is a trigger. With this disease, I can't wear a mask because I'm supposed to avoid triggers. And the more and I have chemical sensitivities too. And they will have to do a terminal clean on the bathrooms and the chemicals. I end up really like horrible headaches and can't be in the area. And so I just said, I can't, I don't see how I could continue to do this job. And so while we were trying to work things out, I was still working. I ended up getting this abscess on my chest. I had had this little cyst on my chest, and I was going to follow up with it when all the medical facilities stopped requiring masks. So my access to healthcare during the pandemic was really limited because of the mask issue, and nobody was sensitive to it at all. Nobody was making any exceptions whatsoever. And so I think, okay, well, I'm going to and it wasn't growing. I was watching it, it wasn't growing. It was tiny. But then all of a sudden, we had gone over to Orcas Island and we had stayed at our timeshare there in Deer Harbor. It was beautiful, but there's a little hot tub on the deck. And so I'd been in this hot tub and I noticed there's no chlorine tablets in here. Well, some bacteria must have gotten in there because when they ended up culturing, I ended up developing an abscess. When they ended up culturing it, there was this really weird bacteria that showed up, and the doctor said that's often found in poorly chlorinated hot tubs. So I put two and two together. But anyway, so this infection was pretty bad. The first doctor I saw put me on a course of antibiotics, and I just bit the bullet and went to a walk-in clinic and told them I can't wear a mask. And like, I need this care and I cannot wear a mask. And I had to fight every time I went, but I did it. And so the doctor put me on a course of antibiotics, which did not work, and said, if this isn't getting better, come back in a week. And so it wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. It was getting mushy. So I went back, and it was a different doctor I went to see, and he was awesome. And he was so great. He's like, yeah, don't worry about the mask thing. But he said, we got to irrigate it. We got to drain and irrigate it. And so he did, cut it open, drain it, and it had tunneled to my sternum. And so he did a culture of the output. He had to pack it. I had to go back every 2 days to get it redressed and repacked. And it had to be left open. I had something over it, but the wound could not be sutured up. It had to be left open because it had to heal from the sternum to the skin, right? In the meantime, I got the results of the culture, and they gave me a different course of antibiotics. I hate taking antibiotics, but it could be very serious if I don't tackle this infection. But that infection activated my mast cell disease worse than ever. And I think also just the stress of needing to go back every other day and fight with people about the mask did not help at all, because I had this it was like an anticipatory nervousness about needing to defend myself and explain myself, plus going through the discomfort of having the wound care. It wasn't comfortable, and it was not done with any anesthetic or anything. So I was working still from home while we were trying to figure out what to do with my job. And I noticed that I was increasingly getting more fatigued, dizzy, nauseated, And then I'd have brain freeze really badly. I could not get my words out. I was slurring my speech, and it was each day was getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where I could maybe do an hour of work, and then I had to tell my coworkers online, I got to go. I can't do this. I cannot even function. And I wasn't safe taking care of these patients. And I mean, we had patients call in that I ended up assessing them over the phone and sending them to the ER because they were in such bad shape. And so I needed to have my brain functioning. So I ended up going on medical leave. And that was in June of 2022. Um, and I spent almost a whole year then on medical leave. Left February of 23. They said, we can't hold your job any longer. My doctor says, I don't know when we're going to release her back to work because we don't know if she's even going to return to her baseline. Because it was so bad. And I ended up laying around. I couldn't do anything. I had zero energy and gaining more weight. The maximum weight I have weighed in at was 347 pounds. Um, and I had tried the carnivore diet back in 2021. And I did it for 6 weeks, but it was for a different reason. It was because I wanted to get myself in the best shape I could because I knew I was going to end up getting COVID. So I was taking my vitamin D and doing all the precautionary things I could do and trying to lose some weight. And I got through COVID fine, no problems. And so my why was gone. But after I'd been on medical leave for almost a year, I was just decreasingly deconditioned. I ended up, because of all the laying around, my lower back was in bad shape. I had pain all over my body, but my hips were horribly painful. I kept tweaking my knee. I was limping around like an invalid. And I was just I was just coming to the knowledge of I am going to be a cripple if I don't do something. And I was getting more and more desperate. I could not see an end in sight to my physical condition. My mast cell disease was so slow in getting better, if it hardly at all. And my husband came to me and said, why don't you try the carnivore diet again?
Let me ask you something before you go into that. During all this time in the last 2 or 3 years prior to your husband saying, "Try the carnivore diet again," did any of the doctors, nurses, anybody on your care team ask you about what you were eating or address your weight or maybe say that some of these things are intertwined?
No.
Did you get any counseling, anything
No,
from
in fact,
any of
it's really
them?
funny because I even to the allergist that I ended up ditching, I even asked him, should I be on a low histamine diet? And he goes, well, if you want to, you can try it. And that was before I
This
was considering carnivore, but I was starting to listen to these doctors that are experts, and they were mentioning histamine in foods. I
Mhm.
started looking into it. And yeah, so I had to bring it up, and he was like, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, if you want to try it, it's not going to hurt. I'm thinking, seriously? Like,
Oh,
don't you think that that would be an important thing for me to
mhm.
do? So yeah, no, and that was something that was already, as a nurse, a pet peeve for me, was that here I was, pretty basically 350 pounds, and seeing all these doctors, and none of them ever said anything about my weight. Like if I said something, they would say, yeah, it'd probably be a good idea for you to lose weight. And I had gone to see a bariatric doctor, but that was when I asked my primary doctor what he thought. Do you think I should go maybe see a bariatric surgeon? And he said, yeah, yeah, and told me where to go. I didn't end up having any bariatric surgery, and I'm really glad I didn't. I gained weight on their weight loss program, first of all.
What? Okay, you have to sidetrack, do a sparkle move here. I call it glitter and gold. Go off the thought process here and tell us about that. You went on their preparation diet and you ended up
Correct.
gaining.
Yeah. Yeah, I ended up heavier than when I started. And because, whenever you go to potentially have bariatric surgery, they want you to see their nutritionist first. And like for 6 months. So I was every month going to see the nutritionist, and they put me on an eating plan, and I went on their eating plan and I gained weight. And so yeah, so then they said, well, okay, so the surgeon's not going to do surgery on you because you're gaining weight, but why don't you go see our nurse practitioner? And so they put me on phentermine, and I did lose like 50 pounds on phentermine, but then it stopped working. And she gave me a whole list of medications for weight loss, and they all have cardiac side effects, but that one has had the least. So I said, okay, I'll try the phentermine. And when it stopped working, I was like, no, I don't want to go on any of these other ones. And she had warned me ahead of time it may stop working at some point. Yeah, so I just didn't do it. And as a GI nurse too, I also did get to experience patients who had the surgery who had a lot of issues afterwards. So I really didn't want to do it.
How long were you on the medication? Y-
Probably about 6 months.
6 months, and then it
Yeah.
stopped working.
And it stopped working. Mhm.
So what would be a reason or a few reasons that the medication would stop working?
I asked the nurse practitioner and she didn't have a specific answer other than it just often stops working with people. So I don't know if the body builds up a tolerance to it, and whatever it's working on in your system, your body adapts.
Okay.
It's an appetite suppressant, and so I wasn't hungry, but I reached its limit of work.
Okay.
It just stopped.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So anyways, I had been through it. I'd been through it with doctors. I was like, just so done with doctors. Yeah. So the allergist telling me, okay, yeah, maybe you could go on a low histamine diet was like, I was so put off by that. Like, shouldn't you know these things? But I've learned with mast cell activation syndrome that it's just not on the radar of most doctors. I've also learned from the experts that it is way more common, and potentially up to 1 in 6 people actually have it and don't realize it. And so I'm trying to get the word out about it for people who are like me, who've had weird symptoms and have been to many specialists and aren't getting answers, or say you get diagnosed with something, but then the treatment doesn't work. Um, I'm just wanting to get the word out that this is a real thing. Put it on your list of things to investigate. Doesn't mean you have it, but you might. And, um, but yeah, so when I went on the carnivore diet the second time, I was in a much more desperate situation. And I just knew that I was going to be a cripple if I did not do something. Um, so I went all in, cold turkey, just boom. It was from eating the standard American, the bad version of the standard American diet with all the processed foods and the sweets and all the, everything looking for an energy source. Yeah, it just went to me. And this time my husband went on it with me, um, which was great. And I saw, like within the first few days, I saw a dramatic decrease in my inflammation. And my inflammatory markers are always elevated. Every time I go see the doctor, they're testing my inflammatory markers and they're always way high. Um, but I'm working with a naturopathic doctor at this point as well, and trying to detox from the molds, taking some compounded medication for the mast cell disease. And before I went on the carnivore diet, I have a couple of dissolvable, well, one's a chewable, one's a dissolvable medication that I keep with me all the time. I call them my rescue medications. If my throat starts to swell, I've learned that I can pop those in there and it can take care of it. I don't have to use my EpiPen, and I do have an EpiPen, but I've never had to use it, thank God. But I do have a chewable Pepsid and a rapid dissolve Claritin, and I take those. I was needing to take those maybe every like 2 to 3 times a week. And then I started the carnivore diet, and I noticed that it was going down to maybe a couple times a month, right? And I was seeing improvement. I was losing weight. I was seeing improvement in so many symptoms, and my reactivity was definitely improving. I wasn't having as many of these acute episodes. Now, there's also a baseline of feeling horrible that was like just my daily baseline. And I was seeing improvement there. It took me a while to get over really feeling fatigued every day, and getting my energy back. And I did not even try to exercise the first probably 3 months. I had no desire, I had no energy to exercise. And then when I did, I just started to walk just around my block. I couldn't even walk a straight line. I was so imbalanced and I was still hobbling and limping on my tweaked knee um but I did it and I just went slowly
Do you
and
have to use any devices once you started making walking a part of your routine? Did you use a cane or a walker or anything to assist you?
I probably should have, but this
Huh,
is par for the course with me.
you're a tough cookie. You and I are twinsies on that. I get it, girl. I get it.
I just staggered along, probably looking like a drunk sailor, right? Oh, my daughter laughs. She says, I would fail a sobriety test without a drop of alcohol. I also have a vestibular conduction disorder on the left side, which I got diagnosed with back in 2013. And so my sensory inputs come in differently on both sides, visual and auditory, and then they meet up in my brain and get all scrambled. And my balance is terrible. But anyways, but I did it and I started to walk. Um, but then I realized like I'm seeing results and I'm doing good. The weight loss was phenomenal, but I decided to go on the lion diet just to see. And I did actually I put it, and I had already started a YouTube channel. And that's another thing I did differently this time. I'm like, I'm going to hold myself accountable. So that's when I started my YouTube channel called Midlife Carnivore. And I discovered the carnivore community because people started subscribing and people started commenting and following me and encouraging me. And I was like, wow, there's actually real people out there that are starting to be invested in my success and in my journey. And that meant so much to me. I just can't tell you how much that meant. And I had these cheerleaders out there and I loved it. I loved it. And so I do, weekly weigh-ins every Monday and I do other videos, but I decided to do a histamine video specifically for carnivores because there's a lot of high histamine foods out there, but I wanted to make a video and it's an educational video. It's a PowerPoint presentation. You got me in a little circle in the corner and I'm very as thorough as I could made this video on histamine intolerance, mast cell activation syndrome, histamine, and how to approach it on a carnivore diet because there are quite a few things I can't have. And so definitely anybody watching, if you think you might have histamine intolerance, watch that video because just in preparing for that video, I reminded myself, oh, wait a minute, there's things I'm eating that I shouldn't be eating that are carnivore. Like I started out doing all the different meats and bacon, which I love, and eggs and cheese and, the whole 9 yards and butter and even, everything. And I found out that, oh, wait a minute, I'm eating cultured butter. Cultured butter is high histamine, whereas sweet cream butter is not. I shouldn't be eating bacon. I shouldn't be eating any aged or smoked meats or cheeses. I shouldn't be eating egg whites. They're high histamine.
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, girlfriend. Wait a minute, wait a minute. You had been eating all of these foods prior to doing this PowerPoint presentation, and you got reschooled, so to speak,
I had
that you shouldn't
already
have been
stopped.
eating these
I
things?
had already stopped some of them,
Okay.
because I had started to learn about it when I got diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome. I joined a Facebook group for both of these conditions I was diagnosed with, and that's where I learned the most.
Wow.
Is from other people that had the same condition. And so they shared a link to this really detailed histamine list from this Swiss group. And so I was already studying that list and I was looking at the different spices and the herbs and all the fruits and vegetables and nuts and all the beverages. It is very, very detailed. Food additives, I was learning, but then when I changed my diet, I forgot to go back and look at it until a little ways in. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't be eating bacon. I need to switch up some of the things that I'm eating. But it wasn't until I actually went to prepare this video that I realized some of the finer details, like the butter that I was eating was cultured butter and not sweet cream butter, that I should not be eating the egg whites. So it kind of took me the next step forward in, wait a minute, I can see why I'm still not completely healing, because I'm still eating some of these high histamine carnivore foods. So I went on the lion diet and I approached it as, this is going to be the ultimate elimination diet. And so I did it for 6 weeks, and just beef, lamb, Redmond sea salt, and water. And that's when I really experienced a big leap forward in my healing. And like, I mean, you can look at my face. I'm not wearing any makeup. And for all my videos, I never wear any makeup because I want people to see the condition of my skin. And if you see, and I will send you the pictures of my rosacea before, like I looked like a leper. It that really, and I really believe too that that helped heal my gut. And the more that I have experimented with the diet, the more I can see the connection between my gut and my outward symptoms, particularly the rosacea. But going on the lion diet, I went from needing my rescue meds maybe twice a month to, at this point, it's been at least over 2 months, maybe even 3 months since I've needed to take the rescue meds.
That
Like,
is
yeah,
amazing.
like my acute reactivity and the throat swelling are pretty much at this point almost entirely gone. Yeah. And my rosacea is so much better. And my gut is so much better. Everything is just, and I actually started to feel this sense of well-being that I had never experienced before. It was almost like a euphoria that would come over me, like, so this is what I'm supposed to feel like. And it was so emotional to feel that, because I had spent my whole adult life feeling horrible every day and just pushing through it and pushing through it. And I didn't know what it felt like to actually feel good. And then and then I started getting energy and actually wanting to exercise. It's like, what?
Okay.
Like, I don't want to exercise. This is like, I hate exercise, but I actually had this energy built up in my muscles. It's like I wanted to exercise. And I always use, since the beginning, I've used a body composition scale. And so I was so surprised to see, even when I wasn't exercising, I was gaining muscle, I was gaining bone, which is, as 50 some woman, gaining bone is super important. Um,
Yes.
yeah. And so it's been really, the body composition changes have been incredible over the past couple weeks. Like I accidentally fell asleep without my CPAP machine.
Mhm.
I had been wanting to test and see whether or not I still have sleep apnea, but I
Okay.
was just too nervous to test it. And I've got this, smartwatch, it tracks my sleep and everything. And so I actually accidentally fell asleep without my CPAP machine. And so I checked my watch, and no awakenings. My sleep was beautiful. Everything was great. My husband was he gets up really early. He woke up and said, she doesn't have her machine. So he watched me. No snoring. My breathing was completely regular. So I'm like, okay, am I cured of my sleep apnea now? And so I have now been 2 weeks without it. And every day I'm
Oh,
checking and
oh
it's fine. So it looks
my
like my sleep apnea is gone at this point. Um,
my
so,
gosh. Wait a minute, wait a minute. So are you going to go for another sleep study to
um,
make sure you're all good, or are you
it's
just going to
all
keep
gonna
using your
depend.
devices?
I may ask for them to send me the at-home one, because it's winter time. They're back to requiring everyone to wear masks everywhere for the most part, and I'm not going to purposely put myself in a trigger situation. I still
Okay.
have to make sure I'm avoiding my triggers. Like
Okay.
like I have to be careful even though it's cooler in Washington than in California when I was first having those real heat sensitivity issues. If it's a beautiful 70 degrees out and sunny, I can still have a reaction because I can react to UV rays. So if the UV index, I have to check the UV index before I go out. And if it's moderate to high, I tend to want to stay in. Because yeah, UV rays can trigger sounds like vibrations, and probably about electromagnetic frequencies can cause reactions. I had to, for quite a while, like we go to church every Sunday, I had to wait until after the music was over to go in because we have like a band, and just the vibration from the sound would trigger me and make me dizzy and feel like I was going to pass out. So I'm better with that. I can actually, most of the time, I can go in and not have as much of an issue. So things are getting better. But yeah, so when it comes to things like any medical care, it's still frustrating. I did, I have been having symptoms of orthostatic intolerance, where if I just stand in one place, I feel like I'm going to pass out. So I did go see a cardiologist this past week, and I had a tilt table study as well. And the cardiologist says, yes, you do have orthostatic intolerance. The tilt table test was in, there was one thing abnormal, but it was like, no, you don't. So I got to go back and figure out, do I or do I not? And if I don't, what is it that's making me feel this way?
That was just really recent, right? Because I think I watched that video. It was a two-part video and one that you did about the test at UW,
Yeah, yeah. And
right?
I did the video and I did get a lot of attention off of the video from about my cardiology appointment because of the consent form.
Mhm, mhm.
And I posted a video, because I do keep my viewers up to speed with what's going on with me with my health. But I went to a new facility to see this cardiologist that I hadn't been to before. And beforehand, they send you this, link and sign these forms and everything. And one, it's always a HIPAA form, which is fine. It's always a form basically saying I'm going to pay my bills, no problem. But then they sent me this form that was a consent form, and it was signing my life away. I read it and I was like, wait a minute. It was consenting to all sorts of crazy things, all sorts of testing and anesthesia and immunizations and all sorts of procedures. It made me acknowledge that my doctor was in control. It made me release them from liability. I'm like, no, I'm not signing this. So, anyways, that turned out to be quite a saga when I went there, and I had to fight because the receptionist didn't want to let me be seen without signing it. I ended up having to talk to the supervisor and then who went to talk to the manager. And yes, I did get seen. And fortunately, the doctor printed out the form and said he'd never read it before and agreed with me. Said, you are not going to sign this. I'm escalating this. This needs to be changed. This is not the right form. So, my takeaway from that was read these forms and do not, you know your rights as a patient.
And then also in there, I was dying with raucous laughter when you said the nurse manager or somebody came back to you and said, "Now, what was that organization that you went to, the AMA?" And I'm like,
They didn't even so this she said the and I said American Medical Association, the governing body of your physicians. It's like, really?
that just sent me into side stitches, girl. Okay. But thank you for sharing that with us about the informed consent. And I have to be candid. I'm one of the ones that just sign like, yeah, 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 yeah. But now I'm going to slow it
Yeah,
down.
I had never
And
seen one like that, to be honest. And honestly, when it comes to consent, you should not be signing any consent form until after you've talked to the doctor. And the doctor goes over why they're wanting to do what they're doing, the risks, the benefits, and then you make the decision if you want to have it done. And then you can sign the consent form if you're comfortable. But you don't ever, and I told them in the lobby, and I mentioned this in my video, I'm sure everybody was looking at me. I was not making a scene. I was just being firm. And I told them nobody should be signing this form. This is an unethical consent. It goes against the code of ethics of the American Medical Association. And, one of the receptionists was giving me some pushback, and I was like, I'm standing my ground.
You go, sister. You go. Okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
love it. Now, let me ask you before we start closing out this, what are some like total non-scale victories that you've had? Because it sounds like you are vocalizing more and more and advocating for yourself more and more, with the consent form and stuff like that. And I can't imagine you not wanting to be confrontational or argumentative or any of that. I can't imagine that. I would think that that was you naturally, but no.
It is when it's something that I am passionate about. I was very vocal in advocating for my patients as a nurse, and I was not afraid to confront the doctors. Most of the doctors were great, but there were some that were kind of doozies, and so I was never afraid to try to intelligently communicate and advocate for my patients. I was never one that would lose it. I always feel as though I need to be smart and I need to be articulate and I need to know what I'm talking about. And then I don't have any problem, you know, confronting a situation. And so I think I'm less likely to feel that way when it comes to defending myself, which is why that was a real accomplishment for me to do that. I am much quicker to defend others than to stick up for myself. Because, this is all again part and parcel for my whole thing with like putting myself on the back burner
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
pushing through stuff and ignoring things for
mhm,
myself. Because it was just always about what am I doing for other people? What am I doing for my kids? What am I doing for my patients?
mm.
So, yeah,
Do you think that during all those years or all that time when you were advocating intelligently for others that you were serving, be it your family, your children, or the people that were in need of your services as far as clients or patients and stuff. Do you think that it was easier to advocate, to be there, and to push for them than for yourself? Am I
absolutely.
making sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what does that tell you about your experience now that you're no longer working as a nurse? But it sounds like you're using some of those skills for yourself right now. What does that tell you? Does that tell you that you could have been doing that all along?
Well, I could think that, but I also have to realize that everyone has their journey.
Yes.
And I had to be in the right headspace. And it's really hard to fight and defend yourself when you feel horrible and when your brain is in a fog. And when you don't have, like, when I'm living off of the very few energy reserves that I have or no energy reserves, the thought of engaging in that sort of a confrontation was just too much and too draining. So I think that what it tells me about myself is that I'm healing metabolically. My mind is healing, it's clearing up. My body is getting the proper nutrients that it needs. And I'm now in a space where I have the reserve to stick up for myself. And it's not going to suck all the life out of me. And I have the stamina that I can do it now, whereas before I couldn't because I had nothing.
I think what I'm also trying to pinpoint is that you had the stamina, you had the gotcha, you had all of that for your family, your children, and your clients and
Yeah.
patients. So, you were what it sounds like is that you were just spread professionally and okay, okay. So
Yeah.
there was
I
nothing
didn't
left
leave
for Lynn.
I didn't leave anything left for
Yeah,
myself.
yeah,
And
in
and
between.
consider I was raising kids that had gone through abuse
Yes.
and had been like my daughter, we were her 12th home and she was 5.5. And our son, he was 4, we were his ninth home. And so the things that they had been through and just the psychological things that went on from, even after we adopted them, the insecurities, the abandonment issues from their childhood, how it affected their education, their ability to focus in class. I was constantly advocating for them and communicating with their teachers and trying to help them work through things in their life. So I was spread very thin emotionally, and I really just was not leaving anything for myself. I didn't really have much left to leave for myself. And so maybe it's a little easier now because my kids are grown. My youngest is 27.
Oh,
Um, but it is the journey that I've been on. And so I
yes.
can definitely look back and say I should have
Mhm.
been better at advocating for myself. But right now I'm just grateful that now I can.
Amen.
Because
Yes.
if I had not gone on this health journey and changed my diet, I probably would have still been in this situation where I could not advocate for myself because I couldn't
Gosh.
even take care of myself physically. I mean, I'd
God,
shower
yeah.
maybe once a week because
God,
I couldn't even raise my arms. I had no
mm,
strength and I couldn't do anything.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's just the journey I've been on. And so, I mean, non-scale, I haven't even talked about my scale victories.
Yes. Well,
So, I
scale,
mean,
non-scale, you continue on
oh
from here.
yeah, so I'll just share, I mean, I've talked a little bit about the results I've had as far as with my mast cell disease. So I did weigh myself this morning. It's Monday when we're recording this, and so I weighed myself this morning, and so I'll just go my totals. So I do look at my scale losses, but I also have this good tissue that I've gained. So I calculate my actual fat loss. And so my scale has me down 73.8 pounds as of today. Okay. But I have gained 24.4 pounds of good tissue, muscle and bone. So my actual fat loss, and this is in little over 8 months, has been 98.2 pounds. So I'm just shy of 100 pounds of fat loss.
You
My
are
visceral,
killing it, girl.
yeah,
Killing it.
my visceral fat started at 30, and today it was at 21. The upper range of acceptable is 15. So I'm still getting there, but I'm getting there. Yeah. You know, I went from wearing like a 3X, sometimes even a 4X in clothes, and now my tops are a size large. I don't even have to go to the plus size section for my tops anymore. I'm size large in my tops. Now my bottom is shrinking a little slower, but I think my pants were maybe like a 28 and now I'm a 20. So yeah, so that's fantastic. I went to see an optometrist about a month ago. My vision has improved. I got a new prescription, and the optometrist was like, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" I said, "I've been on the carnivore diet." So my prescription is not as strong. I did a plank challenge all the month of January, and this was the whole thing about me wanting to exercise. My goals for 2024 um, are fitness related. And right at the beginning of 2024 into 2023, I went on my channel. And I said, look, I usually don't set any resolutions or goals because I have no energy. But I said, at this point, I think fitness is going to be my goal because now the carnivore diet is now within my comfort zone. So I'm not going to challenge myself to do something that's within my comfort zone. I'm going to challenge myself with something that's outside my comfort zone, which is fitness, because I have been avoiding it my whole life. And I had tried to do a plank earlier on and starting the carnivore diet. I could not lift my big belly off of the ground. But I figured, well, let's try it again because I've gained all this muscle. Like, let's see, I've lost fat. So let's see what happens. So January 1st, I filmed my first plank and my daughter timed it. I had no idea that if I was going to be able to get off the ground. And I was so excited. I actually got off the ground and I held it for a whole whopping 8 seconds. But I kept going throughout the month. And I had, again, my cheerleaders on my channel, like they were helping me. They were like coaching me on my breathing and, giving me all these tips. By January 31st, I held my plank for a minute and 11 seconds.
Handled. You did the darn thing.
I did it. Yeah. So, I mean, so that's a huge non-scale victory for me. Getting over the sleep apnea, is massive. My balance is better. I got a rebounder, a little mini trampoline. I've been doing that. And initially, I think I did a little too much and my lymphatics drainage kind of kicked in real fast. And I felt horrible for a little while, but I got over that. And, and so, yeah, so now I'm on the rebounder. I'm bouncing around and having fun. And I can walk 4 miles now.
So,
And
so then that means we can do Green Lake, baby, because one loop around is 2.8 on the inner perimeter and
yeah,
3.1 on the exterior perimeter. So we can meet up there,
I
girlfriend.
may not be able to keep up with you,
Oh, no, we would
but
gather and socialize. But anyway, but go
yeah.
ahead.
But and so a couple of my goals that I still have yet to meet this year is I want to do a 5K and I don't expect to run it, but I want to finish it. So I'd love to have you join me. And I want to be able to dance at my daughter's wedding, which is May 3rd, and have some stamina and not peter out. And one that is really important to me is my husband. We have an airplane and he's been flying since before I met him. And I have never been able to fit in his airplanes. We've been married for 33 years and I have never flown with my husband. And so my goal is to be able to fit in his airplane and fly with him for the first time. And I anticipate that it'll be this summer that I'm going to be able to do that.
It is going to happen, my
And
friend.
I'm going
It
to
will
film it.
happen.
I'm going to film that.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's been an unbelievable life-changing experience for me. I've gotten connected with the upcoming carnivore diet documentary. Um I am the production coordinator. I got somehow got connected, met people, people were interviewing me, got, in the connection there. And like, I'm so passionate about it. It's so important to get this documentary out. So I'm doing everything I can behind the scenes, interviewing candidates for the documentary. Not everybody, that I interview on my channel is a candidate, and I don't announce who is and who isn't because I really just want to let people share their stories and experience the amazing carnivore community. And so I'm super excited for this documentary to come out.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are so blessed to have you on their team, Lynn.
Oh,
They
well, thank
really
you.
are. I love watching you. You just have so much knowledge that you impart to your viewers and everything. And you, I feel, really, really care. You really
I
care.
do. I do.
And and so let me ask you before we close out, what's your favorite meal, if there was ever a favorite meal? And do you do one meal a day, 3 meals a day? What does that look like for you?
I'm like every other carnivore and I love ribeye. you know, I got, but to be honest, I'm loving lamb. I'm at first because I started on the lion diet, I was doing the lamb and the beef, and I had never really eaten lamb before, and it was a little bit of an a, adapting, to lamb. But the more I eat it, the more I love it. And so I get these lamb steaks, and we actually ended up from a local rancher buying a cow and a sheep, and we went through all of the steaks on our cow. We'd order more cow, but we ordered two more sheep, and so we're gonna be getting them probably later this week. But yeah, so it's a toss up for me between ribeye and lamb steaks. But I do like getting the beef fat trimmings and cutting them up into bite-sized pieces and air frying them and then kind of salting them and eating them like popcorn. It's a great carnivore snack. Yeah, so that's probably, if I had to choose something to live off on forever, it would be kind of right in that area. Yeah.
Now, are you doing 1 meal a day, 2 meal a
Yeah.
day?
It
How does
really
that look?
varies. I kind
Okay.
of just listen to my body. And there are times where I do a lot of intermittent fasting just because I'm not hungry. And like yesterday I had one meal and was fine. And then there's other times where I'm hungry and I have 3 meals. So I'm just learning to really just listen to my body and not be afraid. I'm not trying to focus so much on weight loss because it's just happening on its own. I'm focused on healing metabolically. And so I'm listening to my body. I do use electrolytes and I'm taking vitamin D and one of the things with the lion diet was iodine. So I am taking a multivitamin. I did try to do the Lucal's iodine, but it's high histamine. And so
Mhm.
initially I was putting some drops in my water and it was making my throat swell. And but then I think I got my histamine down low enough to where I was able to tolerate it, but then I think it was messing with my gut a little bit. So I've backed off. But otherwise I did add fish later, but I don't have fish that often. I just
Okay.
So I'm kind of some people say I'm on a sea lion diet because I add
Uh,
the fish to the lion diet, but I'm kind of mostly still lion diet. Yeah,
okay.
but 1 meal a day, sometimes 2, sometimes
Yeah.
3.
Okay. So you listen to your body and just do what you need to do intuitively or however you're feeling in that moment.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
don't look at the scale as
Mhm.
any indicator that the quantity of food I'm eating is right or wrong. I go by just how do I feel? And if I feel good and I feel like I've got energy and, then I'm fine with whatever quantity of food I'm eating.
All right. So, do you have any words of wisdom that you can impart on somebody who's trying to decide if carnivore, keto, or just even low carb would be their jumping off point? Could you lend them some advice or some words of wisdom?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say do dig in and do your research on it. There's it's different now. Like years ago when I did keto, there really wasn't a whole lot online like about carnivore and there was a little bit about keto, but there's so much now. You've got all the carnivore doctors, Dr. Berry and Dr. Chafee and Dr. Tony Hampton and Sean Baker, who's our local Washington doctor. And I mean, the list goes on and on. There's all these carnivore doctors. I would say also go look up Carrie Homestead Howe. He has so many interviews on his channel. Find the people out there that are sharing their stories because the more and get plugged in because the more you hear these stories the more you go, okay, wait a minute, this could be something that could actually work because these doctors are endorsing it. Dr. Philip Ovadia, who is the cardiothoracic surgeon, will put to rest any of your fears about cholesterol,
Yeah.
as will Dr. Barry. Don't the cholesterol issue, there's information out there. Don't let that
Mhm.
stop you. Don't let your fear of fat stop you. Fat is healthy. You need it for your brain. You need it for your nervous system, for your hormones. Do not be afraid of fat. All the myths around fat and cholesterol have been put to rest.
Right
um,
on.
yeah, and then try it.
Mhm.
Give it a try if you have. And I'm not really like picky about anybody, like, how they try it, like, for go cold turkey versus ease into it. But maybe while you're researching, start cutting out some carbs, cut out the
Yeah.
breads and the grains and all the starchy stuff, and then, work your way to whatever, at the pace that you can do.
Right.
Going to benefit your health just to start making the changes. And the more you hear people's stories, the more you'll feel like, okay, this is something I can do.
Mhm.
Get on the live streams and start participating in the live streams, and you'll see how loving the carnivore community is and supportive everybody is. Yeah.
Right on, Sister Lynn. Thank you so much. So, you guys have heard it here first on this channel, Miss Lynn from north of Seattle, Snohomish, right? Snohomish County, and I'm down here in Pierce County. We're gonna get together one day soon. One day, when I don't know, but one day soon.
Yeah.
And we're actually next door neighbors. So I feel so fortunate and blessed to have had this conversation with you today, Lynn. And I appreciate you taking the time. So stay on for just a second, please. All right, my friends, until next time, please like and subscribe to both our channels. Lynn is midlife carnivore, and I am carnivore girl for life on YouTube. All right, friends, take care.